do you remember when they used to sculpt like these amazing like
Mm.
pictures of
That still
humanity like
happens.
into stone?
That's still done today.
Yeah,
In
no,
fact,
but
it's
like,
done more today than it was in the
but
past.
yeah, but people are like to it, and then they prop up shit like this and say it's nice and good art,
Mm.
and I just don't get it.
Art is much more variable these days, and there's much more different ways of
Yeah,
expressing
people
it.
put a fucking
It's
banana on a wall and tape it there, and that's art.
that's more so just money laundering, but art's much more varied. But as I say, there's probably much more realistic people sculpting today in the ancient Greek and Roman fashion than there was then, in absolute numbers. Not proportionally, but in absolute numbers, there's probably more of that today than there was back then. But the point is that there's
but the
much
skill
more.
is
There's
gone.
loads of other. No, the skill isn't gone for doing that. But there's much more other kinds of art which involve either a different kind of skill or, yes, just less skill, but which haven't been explored as far, and so there's more potential there. And I think you could agree that for something like a kid's toy shop, for example, this art style is probably better than a completely realistic stone sculpture of a person. I'd agree with you that the stone sculpture probably requires more skill,
Well, the
but
reason I
this
say
has
that
its
too,
place.
no, I know the reason I say that too is, well, like back in that time, the people that would be doing the sculptures would usually be paid by like the wealthy, like the churches or something like that, for years,
Yeah.
for over like 6-7 years to work on that one piece. And it's very unlikely to get that in this day and age unless you're dealing with like severely like wealthy clients.
Mm. There probably
And
are
I
still
think
projects
like people
like that.
dedicated their whole lives to like certain pieces of art, you know, like they
Mm.
made it throughout their whole life, and that was their whole being.
Yeah.
I don't think there is as much of that passion anymore, but
Possibly
maybe there is.
not.
Maybe I
It's
just haven't
also,
seen it.
yeah, there probably are some like multi-year or maybe multi-decade art projects, and maybe even more today than were back then. But it's not as common because it's just more ways of doing it. And what could have been a lot more challenging back then is not as challenging today with modern technology. But then even still, I bet that there are people who actually chisel perfect statues by hand still today, and maybe even more today than they were in ancient Greece. Like
They just probably would need clients to be able to facilitate them doing
yeah,
that for a
but it
long
probably
time.
is a lot cheaper too. And they probably do
Yeah.
have better tools to do it if they wanted to. But I'm not trying to question the general point you're making, because the changing of standards over time is a real thing, and you do get less focus, like pointed skill in some areas, and more generalizing and more versatility and
The
accessibility. It is a
prestige of
fairly
it.
common pattern, and yes, the importance and all that, but that doesn't necessarily equal a worse situation. And sometimes it's a perspective problem, that if you look at it a certain way, actually things are better in every way than they were back then, even by that thing's own standards. And that is a pretty common pattern. It is a natural response to technology improving. But there may be something important that we've actually genuinely lost from back then. It doesn't seem like it's actually lost. It seems like it's just changed the way we handle it.
I don't know. I just feel like modern day artists really like ruin everything. I don't
Well,
know.
this is what I mean, is it's more accessible. As a programmer, I definitely attest that there's a lot of bad programmers. And 20, 30 years ago, most programmers were a lot better than the average today. That's because very few people could do it. It cost a lot more money. Exactly what you're saying. It's the same pattern. But
Train AI
good
to do it nowadays, yeah.
good programmers still exist today. In fact, there are many, many more good programmers today than there were 30, 40, 50 years ago. In absolute numbers, many more. By proportion,
But also the
there are
younger
more
generation,
bad
yeah.
programmers today. But in
Well,
absolute
the
numbers, there are
younger
more,
generation
many more
are
good
becoming
programmers.
less tech literate,
I'm not
haven't
sure
aren't
about
they?
that. I'm
Like
not sure about that. Maybe
there's been
more.
talk about it.
They're,
How
they're, they're
because
going to be
the kids
familiar
are
with a
growing
more
up on
abstracted version.
iPads.
Yeah, a more
Well, no,
abstracted
the
version
problem
of
is
tech where
like,
they can use it but they don't understand it.
the thing is, it works, right? Like everything they
Yeah.
want done on it will work. Unlike before, where you would need people that would know how to go into like
Yeah.
your
It's the
task
same
manager,
pattern.
bring up these certain things, yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's the
most
same pattern.
most younger generations can't do that, even though they've
Mm.
grown up on technology.
It's the same pattern of accessibility. What I was going to say about the programming is that whilst you have a greater proportion of programmers being bad programmers, you therefore have more programs being written. Because a program written badly is better than no program at all. Having something written to do a certain task is better than not having it. And so if we're changing from almost every programmer is a good programmer, and you have very few programs written, to most programmers are bad, but you have more good programmers in absolute numbers, and there's way more programs written for all kinds of things, that is just better. And I think that is the same pattern. Of course, looking at it from ground level, you would see, the whole enterprise, the whole art form, the whole industry of programming has gone down the shitter. But realistically, it's better in every way. And I think that's the same thing with the art, is that people tend to romanticize the ancient Greek sort of attention to detail, and as you said, like the long. I'm not saying this is wrong either. It's just that the perspective, I think, is a little bit warped, because if you take it in a more sort of practical terms and compare like to like, pretty much better in every way today than it was back then. I'm not
Well,
saying
Revan
nothing's
also
been
brings up
lost.
Well, Revan also brings up a good point with like architecture in general too, and how shitty it's become when you compare it to a lot of
Yeah,
the things that were done
that
back in
one's
the day.
tough.
Like, and it's true. It's like you walk down a massive city and it's just fucking massive blocks of gray. That is
Yeah,
all it is. And the only
that
nice
one is a bit
buildings,
different.
like in Ireland here, like the only nice buildings you see are the old cathedrals that were built fucking decades ago,
Mm.
and they still hold the test of time, and they're beautiful. We don't
Yes, the
modern day. Nah, you don't get that
yeah,
anymore.
the pattern I'm describing does not apply to everything. And architecture is one that I don't think it does. I can't really explain. I still don't exactly know why there is so little good quality architecture these days. Like, I'm sure people could explain, like, the industry has done this, and I'm sure people could pontificate as well about how they think it's the loss of a soul of a culture. I can also make or guess at such statements, but talking from a very broad, zoomed out, principled perspective on trying to express that in a pattern, I don't know. I don't know why that would happen. I don't know
I
why
think it
that
comes
would
down to
happen to an art form.
materials. Yeah, I
As I
think a
said, like
lot of
there's
it
all
is to
kinds
do
of
with
like
materials.
yeah, there's all kinds of on the ground
Massive
reasons.
problem. Yeah, because again,
It may
if
simply
it's the
be that
government that is wanting them to build something, right? Like a lot of the time, it's like big companies that want these buildings done, and it's not like you're not dealing with a lot of people that actually care about like a lasting impact like before, where you're just building these buildings that will be teared down after a few years.
mm,
It seems, and the material is so shit too that they just don't hold up. Like after a few years, it's just crumbling down, which you don't get with the older buildings. Like they're still
well,
up after decades, like
planned obsolescence.
hundreds of years.
Yeah, planned obsolescence is generally thought of as coming into effect in the mid 20th century, largely, and that is pretty much also the time that this happened. Um, so it could be that. It could be that it's just it's so much cheaper to build them that way, and it's even easier to deconstruct them that way. That it's just way more energy efficient overall to do it like that. Of course, it's less attractive, and maybe the point there is that having an attractive building just isn't a priority. But again, this is point I'm making in terms of finding the deeper principled answer. I'm not sure why there would be so little drive to make attractive buildings today, and so
Well,
much
I
more in the
think
past.
a lot of people in the past too had the the vision of the future, right? Like they were leaving stuff for the next generation. This kind of mindset, I think, is definitely not modern day mindset. Like I really don't see, especially like even our generation of people really even caring for the future or even wanting kids or to leave anything behind
Mm.
like that. It seems like that's been like most people don't have that drive for whatever reason.
It may be that what I was just describing with that pattern with art and technology before, that's more so a reflection of the changing technology available, the changing tools available. But with architecture, it's more a reflection of the culture that's presently in power. And since the culture of the last 50 years has been, well, we all know what it's like, we discuss it regularly, that has been reflected in the architecture. Maybe there are other things that would fit the cultural expression pattern that architecture does rather than the technological expression pattern that like formats of art and programming do. Maybe that's the principled pattern to use. But yeah,
I
either way,
want my
I
cathedrals back.
I
I
kind
want
of
everything
like
to look like
I kind of like
really
both.
old, like vampires live there. That's what I
Mm.
want.
I like aspects of both. Like some of the modern architecture I do like, but you really can't go wrong with the uh, peak, shall we say, old architecture styles. Gothic is a good example. Uh, that
They're
probably
so
won't ever go
pretty.
out of fashion. Um,
I mean,
and I think
I'm lucky
most,
to be surrounded by a lot of it too, where
yeah,
like people come here to see it. But it's also sad because a lot of it's being taken, like torn down as well,
mm, most examples
which
of
I
modern
think is
architecture probably won't last. Some of them may do, but
the last 40 years at most because of the materials used. The
maybe it
materials is a
just
massive issue.
yeah, maybe it is actually maybe it's the materials are just it's maybe stone lends itself really well to the kind of beauty that you can see Spoon is just posted there, and steel just doesn't. But I'm not sure if that's the case. I mean, you could certainly.
Glass
I mean,
too. They put
you
glass
could
on
use some.
everything. Like,
Yeah, you could use almost any material for the outside of the building to
oh,
create shapes like that. Maybe that's it though. Is that steel and glass, which are both the best structural material and the most useful material for large panels of the outside of the building, do not lend themselves to being sculpted, while stone does. And so all it is that while they were building the stone building, they had the opportunity to sculpt it, so they figured they might as well. But then we don't see many buildings from that time period that are just flat stone, do we? I mean, maybe there are some. Maybe they were the ones that got torn down, and the beautiful ones survived. Hey, maybe that's the answer. Yeah, Revan, I know that glass and obviously steel can be sculpted, but I don't think it's as easy to do as with stone. Then again, maybe that's wrong. I'm grasping at straws here, trying to come up with a decent answer to this for why it would be so like because it's not just that most buildings are in some modern style. Almost no buildings that were built in the last 30, 40 years have a great deal of sort of intricacy and attention to detail. Not that I know of. Maybe there are some examples that you guys know of.
mm.
I don't know of any. And it is odd that it's so few. Maybe the answer is that we've sort of mastered the art of making buildings, technologically speaking, and the way that is genuinely much better to construct buildings out of is you just again it doesn't lend itself to that like steel and glass.
I think as well. There's a lot of things lost in the trade of like how people were able to make certain buildings or make certain things last. I feel like a lot of technology or like skill, like in handwork too, and that kind of sphere has been lost, and they only are they're bringing in a lot of people that they just need to lay bricks down, and they're incapable of really sculpting a building like a cathedral, for instance, because cathedrals like these that chatter posting would take immense skill, and they were also being paid well to make this.
Mm,
And I feel like in modern day, people are being paid pennies. The material is shit, and like to make it look pretty would cost extra money that they're just not willing to do. Because most buildings, I think, are being done for as little and as cheap as possible
mm.
now. Like
Maybe
that
it's a
is just
matter
the modern day.
of ostentatiousness that if a building needed to look impressive it would be sculpted and they'd be paid very well. But again, still, why was there that demand, and why is it still true for train stations and other buildings that did not need to look like offices of power, like Parliament and like churches were? They were those buildings were supposed to look like otherworldly to the average person, the average peasant. They're supposed to look so far above everything they've experienced that it gives them an air of authority. But train stations don't really need that, and yet a lot of them are very beautiful.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure
Yeah.
about the lost technology. What I think is true there is that you've got more specialized building builders. You've got people that just lay bricks. You've got people that just know how to do one thing. But that's something that does happen very often in every industry. The production line. People have more specialized, narrower jobs, whereas in the past you would have people that would know a lot of everything in their particular field. I think those people do still exist today. There are still people that know a lot of
Well,
everything, and
it's
the
it's a
methods
mixture
to
of it
build
all.
the methods to build that stuff probably aren't lost.
Because if you've noticed too, with if we go back to the art, right, where you have these old like sculptures and stuff out on like public streets being vandalized or torn down by the government, and then you see what's put up in place of it too. Like it's all happening at the same time. Buildings look ugly, art is fucking shit. They're tearing down the old and putting up the like this new shit. All of it combined is just making everything look way worse. And it's like it's not like it's done by design, but at the same time, it feels like it's all being done at the same time intentionally. But I think it's just the nature of penny pinching, a lot of it as well. Not willing to pay people what they're worth, giving anyone that will just lay a brick a few pennies to do it. Like they don't care how it looks. They just need the building done.
Well, there's obviously some truth to that, but I still think there is a reason behind all that that explains why that's happening that I don't know yet. I'm trying to figure it out. But you can certainly say that it's that modern culture is not glorifying the intricate and high quality. It's glorifying the dehumanizing and cheap, and that there is truth to that. Still, though, I'm curious as to why that is happening so consistently, and I don't know the reason yet. Um,
Well, if you noticed it, well, you know, with like the Big Ben reconstruction, right? Like that took 4 to 5 years to do, and I just
mm,
don't know why things like that are taking so long.
Probably
Cause,
always would have taken that long, maybe longer.
but would it though? Because like you would see these massive stuffs being built before, and they would have. I feel like they were done within. Yeah, like there's a lot of like the American what is it, bridges and stuff, like with some of the old ones being done within
Mm.
a year and a half, and there's these massive constructions, and then just to like top it up takes an extra 8 years on
Well,
top
I
of it.
think those were obviously industrial era constructions. Most of
Yeah,
them were
could be that too.
1900s, but the reason that the Big Ben would have taken longer probably is because it is a very old building and maybe structurally unsound, and probably they had to be extremely careful. The one thing that might slow it down today more than anything that wouldn't have slowed it down a couple hundred years ago actually is safety standards. Which, on the one hand, seems like, well,
Mm.
that's a terrible waste. It's a pussification of our culture and all that. But if your brother or father or son was a building worker who was crushed to death by an avoidable accident, then you might change your opinion. And that's happened enough times that safety standards have evolved to the point that now very, very few people ever die in such incidents. Whereas in the industrial era, it would have been much more common.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the construction, because there's ones that require like intense safety standards, and then there's some that have absolutely no safety standards whatsoever.
Mm.
So
I mean, it
there's
was,
like a massive
yeah.
swing between it.
The Big Ben it's a internationally recognized landmark right next to the Parliament building in the middle of London, next to a busy road, and the building cannot change in appearance, and it's very old, and it's a functional clock, though they may have stopped that for the construction, and they can't get construction equipment too close to it. It's a very challenging project, I expect,
Mm,
to repair
yeah.
that. Um, Maybe the rate that they did it for 4 or 5 years, maybe that's actually very commendably fast. I don't know exactly. I feel like if
Well, you'd probably have to get someone who knows stuff about this to go
mm,
in and see the details of what they posted, what they actually changed. Because if all they did was like just mess with the clock, but then again, the clocks are also very mechanically complicated, which you would need a lot of people that would know how that would work and to put it back together correctly and stuff. So maybe there's just less people that know those kind of things and they charge up the wazoo too, or that they're not able to get there on certain days as
Mm.
well. Like there's all that kind of nonsense too. I don't know. I just feel like everything's looking ugly and we need to change
Mm.
it.
I'm not saying you're wrong in that feeling either. I just think that it's often exaggerated. But when it comes to architecture, I think it's a much stronger argument. And again, I don't know the deeper reason for why that's happening.